to discuss about the topic light matter interactions and characterization techniques, organized by Department of Physics, St. Xavier's College, Palayam. Without any further delay, let's start the event. Prayer. A day without prayer is a day without a blessing, and a life without prayer is a life without path.
Let us cleanse our minds for prayer. Oh God, Heavenly Father, thank you for this wonderful day. Her God-given knowledge to all of us. May she be blessed to bring her expertise to people who need them. Bless all the participants so that they would be able to glean the vital information through this webinar. May all our activities glorify your spirit of love and generosity. We ask all this in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, ma'am, for your spiritual prayer. Welcome speech. Coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is a process. Working together is a success. Now I welcome Mr. Shankar Raja of 2nd MSc to deliver the welcome address.
Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. A warm welcome to one and all who have joined this webinar session on light matter interaction and characterization technique, organized by the Department of Physics, St. Xavier's College, Palayam. Initially, I would like to welcome our beloved patron, Reverend Father Dr. S. Mariyadas S.J., the principal of our college. He is a person known for his punctuality, well-wisher, supporter, and a great role model of our students. Hearty welcome, Father. Next, I would like to welcome our esteemed resource person, Dr. R. Bharati, MSc PhD, who is a postdoctoral fellow at Bar Ilan University, Israel, for sharing her valuable time with us. With a grateful heart, I would like to introduce the convener of this webinar, Dr. D. Premanan, head of the department, and Dr. L. Arunjos, assistant professor. Welcome, sir. Next, I would like to praise the organizer of the webinar, Dr. S. G. Rijit and Dr. M. Agustin, for the meticulous planning and execution. I also welcome all the professor, staff member, and young Abdul Kalam of various colleges who are present here. I am sure this session is going to make our Thursday a thought-provoking. Without further delay, let's enter into the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar Raja.
HOD, sir.
Yes.
Sir, it's your turn, sir.
Respected Reverend Father Dr. V. Henry Jerome, the rector of St. Xavier's Institution, Reverend Father Dr. Alphonse Manikam, the secretary of St. Xavier's College, Palayam, Reverend Father Dr. S. Mariyadas, the principal of our college, the organizing secretaries, Dr. L. Arunjos and Dr. R. Mary Janila of the Department of Physics, St. Xavier's College, Palayam. The resource person of this webinar, Bharati Rajeshwaran, postdoctoral fellow, Bar Ilan University, Israel. Good morning to one and all. I would like to speak about the light matter interaction and characterization techniques. If I'm not mistaken, Dr. Bharati Rajeshwaran will be speaking on some main elements on spectroscopic techniques, I assume. So based on this, I would like to give a brief view on spectroscopy. Spectroscopy and its applications form a significant part of modern chemistry and physics. From its derivation, the word spectroscopy appears to mean the watching of images. But the modern subject covers the interaction of electromagnetic radiations with matter. The most important consequence of such interaction is that energy is absorbed or emitted by a matter in a discrete amounts called quanta. So this is the main theme of the spectroscopic technique. Therefore, the absorption or emission process or gamma region process. Maybe it may be a nuclear absorbance or the Mossbeer effect to the radio region or nuclear magnetic resonance. When the measurement of radiation frequency is done experimentally, it gives a value for the charge of energy involved, and from this one may draw the conclusion about the set of all possible discrete energy levels of matter. Therefore, the various branches of spectroscopy generally involve measurement of two important experimental parameters, which are the energy of the radiation absorbed or emitted by the system and the intensity of the spectral lines. Therefore, in most branches of spectroscopy, the system interacts with the electric field. However, in the case of magnetic resonance spectroscopy or FT Raman spectroscopy, it interacts with the magnetic field. So to cut short, spectroscopy is one of the most powerful tools available for the study of atomic and molecular structure, and it is used in the analysis of wide range of samples. The study of spectroscopy can be carried out on the following nets. One, it can be on atomic spectroscopy. Other, it can be on molecular spectroscopy. And this kind of spectroscopy finds a variety of applications. So to quote a few, in solid state physics, Raman spectroscopy is used to characterize materials. It is also used to measure temperature and find the crystallographic orientation of a sample. As with single molecules, a solid material can be identified by characteristic phonon modes. And therefore, information on the population of a phonon mode is given by the ratio of the Stokes and anti-Stokes intensity of the spontaneous Raman signal. Therefore, this Raman spectroscopy can also be used to observe other low frequency excitations of solids such as plasmons, magnons, and superconducting excitons. Raman spectroscopy is also used in chemistry to identify the molecules and study the chemical bonding and intermolecular bonds. Raman and infrared spectra is used to determine the vibration frequencies of certain silicon molecules also. And therefore, Raman is also used to study the addition of substance to an enzyme. So summing up, the Raman spectroscopy is a wide variety of tool in the spectroscopic technique, and this kind of spectroscopic technique will be detailedly dealt with the resource person, Dr. Bharati Rajeshwaran. And therefore, this is the scope of the webinar. So thank you one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for explaining the useful purpose and scope of this webinar. I welcome our Assistant Professor, Dr. L. Arun Jose, Department of Physics, to give an introduction about our honorable resource person.
Good morning, one and all. It's my pleasure to introduce our resource person. She has an experience in both industry, quality enhancement, and academic research. She had completed her undergraduate in physics at Raj College, Chennai. She had joined in Anna University for her postgraduate in material science. After her master's, she joined Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore for her doctorate. Then she moved to Madras Rubber Factory, shortly known as MRF, as an assistant manager. Once again, she shifted towards academic research for her postdoctorate in the Department of Chemistry, Ber Ilan University, Israel. She had published many research papers in reputed journals. Without any further delay, I hand over the session to our eminent speaker, Bharati Rajeshwaran. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing
Thank you everyone for your kind
about our resource person.
introduction.
Let's turn to the core part of this meeting. I welcome our resource person, Dr. R. Bharati, MSc PhD, postdoctoral fellow, Bar-Ilan University, Israel, to begin this webinar on light matter interaction and characterization techniques. Over to the resource person.
Thank you everyone for your kind introduction. Good morning everyone. Thank you organizers for having me here for the invited talk. Thank you Assistant Professor Ranjos for the invite. I'll move on to the presentation on light matter interaction and characterization techniques. I would like to mention that we in our lab study light matter interactions at the nanoscale using different techniques. But here I largely aim to have this talk very basic and fundamental for the undergrad and postgrad students, and also keep it very particular to one or two techniques at the very least. Having said that, this is the outline of my talk. I'll start my presentation with an introduction to light matter interactions, typically a brief history on how the study has been, and it is in this context I'll introduce the audience to different kinds of scattering, different kinds of interactions such as scattering, absorption, etc. I'd like to explain scattering a little more, which will pave us to appreciate the characterization technique I just mentioned. From scattering, we will delve into Raman effect. Though the title of my talk is characterization techniques, I mostly will be talking on Raman spectroscopy as a characterization tool for analyzing inorganic materials as a fingerprinting tool. I'll briefly explain the importance of these techniques in various industries, especially in medicine, in studying the biological molecules, in differentiating different organic molecules, and in oils and explosives, in the petrochemical industry and entire industry where I worked. I'll also conclude this. I'll conclude the talk by giving presenting an overview of where this technique stands in terms of its research, in terms of what's the scope of this technique for future. So I'd rather like to present the scopes and thereby hope to impress upon every one of you to realize as to how important this technique is. Before moving on to study the light matter interaction, it is good to appreciate the time scales and length scales of our day-to-day events. That brings us to this illustration we have on the electromagnetic spectrum, which explains the time scales and the length scales of certain events or things available in nature for us to correlate. For example, we start with radio waves here, whose wavelengths are of the range of few kilometers, and by their very name we understand that they are used in radio communications. An FM radio station is an example of frequency modulated radio waves which can be received and transmitted. Similarly, we have a radiation, say microwave radiation, which we use in many walks of our lives, the last being a microwave oven. It's being used in many communication systems, satellites and lidars. We have infrared radiation, which is used in surveillance, detectors, cameras, and then we have visible from 400 nanometer to 700 nanometer. All of these are arranged in the order of increasing frequencies or decreasing wavelengths. And you have a quick link to energy conversion here in case you need it. After visible, we have ultraviolet, and then we have X-rays, where we can actually study atoms and molecules, and then we have gamma rays. So what is shown here is amplitude modulated, frequency modulated. Say we can think of it as a radio wave. And then what is shown here is the applications of infrared radiation or studying infrared radiation, how it is the most sought after study these days. Like this is a classic case of hotspot in sports, it's being applied. And here we can see when you capture night light with visible as well as infrared, infrared gives us better quality. So we all know that light is a form of electromagnetic radiation and is usually understood as a wave. That is why in the previous slide we tried to understand the characteristic of different radiations in terms of wavelength and frequencies, and we said that depending on the chemical nature of material that we'll have different kinds of light matter interactions. Since we say that light is a wave, let's try to understand to define the nature of it. A wave is usually understood as having crests and troughs. Simple sine wave is what is shown here. The y-axis is amplitude, explaining how strong the light is, and the x-axis, that's the y-axis, and you have the x-axis say, which is a distance, and the distance between two consecutive crests or troughs is a wavelength. And per unit time, how many such waves can be accommodated will give us the frequency. And what this suggests is that if you have very long wavelengths in a given time, the frequency of this wave will be very small, which in other words says that they are related by the velocity of propagation of light, because velocity of propagation is constant in any medium, or say in free space, which is 3 into 10 power 8 meter per second. Wavelength and frequency have an inverse relationship. This is not okay. Light, as in when we talk about light, we talk about light of so many wavelengths and frequencies. So in general, electromagnetic radiation is composed of several wavelengths and frequencies. Well, we understand it is important to know about waves, wavelengths and frequencies. In 1671, Newton did an experiment. He let the sunlight pass through a glass prism, and he observed that it split into 7 constituent Vibgyor colors, rainbow colors, and it is arranged in the order of wavelengths. So if you spread an electromagnetic wave in terms of frequency or wavelength, we get a spectrum. That's what he called as a spectrum. The process of getting this spectrum is spectroscopy. Let me introduce briefly spectroscopy here. This started in the 17th century with Newton. He described this rainbow of colors as spectrum or solar spectrum. What followed this was the identification of dark lines in the solar spectrum, also called as Fraunhofer lines. These dark lines were used to find various elements present in the solar spectrum. To understand the dark lines, let's go back to our high school chemistry laboratory. We have done this test called the flame test, where we would have heated salts like barium chloride, lithium chloride, sodium chloride. So if you heat sodium chloride in a Bunsen burner, you will see a bright yellow color. The color will change if you change the material to, say, barium chloride, you will get green, and lithium chloride you will get red, and copper chloride you will get blue. And if you take this yellow light coming out of sodium and then send it through a glass prism like Newton did, like this, we will be doing our spectrometer experiments in our college. You will see 2 distinct lines. These 2 lines match exactly with the dark lines present in the solar spectrum. They are called the D lines that correspond to sodium or Fraunhofer lines in the solar spectrum. The origin of this yellow color lies in the fact that when sodium is heated, yellow light is emitted. The dark lines in the solar spectrum, in a similar way, correspond to the presence of different elements present in the atmosphere. This means sun's radiation is absorbed by various elements present in the atmosphere in different forms. While that's a case of absorption, what we did to confirm the same was flame test, which is a form of emission spectroscopy. So we have absorption spectroscopy and emission spectroscopy. In general, spectrum obtained by atoms consists of lines, whereas that from molecules will be bands, much broader than the discrete lines. So when light interacts with matter, there are different possible events. Some of them are mentioned here. The light can just get scattered. As we saw in the previous case, molecules can absorb light, they can emit light. The absorbed light can cause more localized heating, and because of which atoms can expand. Light can just scatter with and without losing energy, or with or without change in wavelength. The right hand side illustration even suggests that light with sufficient energy can break molecules apart, rearrange them, or react with them chemically. Some of these chemical reactions is probably responsible for, say, degradation of ozone layer. Okay, let's get back to where we were. So we discussed a little bit about spectroscopy, and there we had to learn about the origin of spectrum, and then we described light as a wave. Is that so? But light, is light a wave? Can we describe all aspects of light or understand all interactions of light with matter with the idea that light is a wave? Apparently not. Look at the schematic here. We have described light as a wave to explain interference as an example. Say we have two waves of the same frequency and of the same phase. When they are allowed to add, they get added, the amplitude gets added up, and we see constructive interference. Whereas with the same two waves with different with same frequencies but with totally opposite phase yields destructive interference. But we can explain interference like this, but can we use this model to describe other phenomena? Though it looks trivial today to go over these discussions, it was not so in the 17th century when there was a debate on what is light made of. In the 19th century, or probably in the early 20th century, Einstein came up with photoelectric effect, which says when a light of particular frequency impinges or interacts with matter, an electron gets ejected. This means electrically charged material is ejected when material absorbs light. In this case, light can be only described if we imagine light as a particle. It's convenient to explain this if we imagine light as packets of energy called quanta. The term photon was coined in 1925 by Gilbert Lewis, but much before that, in 1913, Niels Bohr quantized theory came into existence, which argued that energy and radii of orbits of electron in atoms are quantized. We have this expression here. We also came with this expression, the energy of transition between the orbits. Bohr's idea of quantization was almost a decade before the birth of quantum mechanics, but Einstein explained the mechanism better. And then in parallel, there was this experiment conducted by Compton, which suggested that light is a particle. So when an X-ray photon hit an electron at rest, there was a scattered photon with a different frequency. So what is light? A particle or a wave? I leave it up to you by telling that light has dual nature, and that when we look at the classical picture, we can imagine it as wave, whereas when we get to quantum world of atoms and molecules of such small lengths and time scales, it's better to imagine light as a particle. In general, electromagnetic radiation falls on matter. It gets absorbed if the energy of radiation corresponds to the separation of two energy levels, which can happen in atoms and molecules. What if electromagnetic radiation is not absorbed? What else can happen? Light can either get scattered or it can get transmitted. Let us say light of particular frequency and intensity is incident on matter, some of which gets scattered and some of which is transmitted. Among the light that gets scattered, there can be some with the same wavelength and some without the same wavelength or without a change in wavelength. One that has no change, the scattered light has the same wavelength as that of the incident radiation. It's called elastically scattered radiation or Rayleigh's scattered radiation. In 1871, Rayleigh showed that the intensity of the scattered light goes inversely as the fourth power of wavelength. So what does that tell us here? As wavelength decreases, intensity of the scattered light increases. This explains the bluish shade or blue color of the sky. But when there is a change in wavelength, it means there is a change in frequency and hence there is a change in energy, in which case it is called inelastic scattering or Raman scattering. So as we saw previously in an experiment with X-rays, what Compton observed was a change in X-ray wavelength. So in a similar way, Raman effect can be thought of as an optical analog of Compton effect. So in 1928, Raman effect was established. So before going to any further, let us look into the experimental setup of Raman spectrometer, as you all carry out spectrometer experiments in dark room to avoid further interaction of other sources of light or stray light, etc. This experiment was also performed in dark room. Sunlight was allowed to fall on the sample after being passed through by Raman spectrometer. After being passed through by a monochromator. Sunlight is, polychromatic, meaning it contains a lot of wavelengths and frequencies, and monochromator is an optical component that filters all possible wavelengths and allows only one particular wavelength to pass through it. Mono meaning single and chrome meaning color. When such a monochromatic light falls on the sample, some of which gets scattered, some of which get transmitted. Transmitted light is blocked, as you can see. The scattered light was passed through the filter, which filtered out the incident radiation, elastic radiation, and then it was observed with a photographic plate and also with the eye. Key features to note here are the position of monochromator, because it kept on changing as the sunlight throughout the day changed, and the scattered light was collected or gathered perpendicular to the incident radiation. This was to minimize crosstalk, and data was taken for longer duration. This experimental setup is almost intact today, but with a lot of advancements. Having learned about Raman's experimental setup, let us now look at Raman spectroscopy. When light falls on matter, as we have seen before, some of which gets absorbed, some of which gets transmitted, and then some of which gets scattered. We have elastically scattered and then inelastically scattered radiation, and then we call them as Stokes and anti-Stokes line, which we'll come to later. So this scattered light containing incident light is Rayleigh, whereas some of these scattered shows increase in wavelength or decrease in wavelength, and that corresponds to molecular vibrations and is very particular to material that it had interacted with. This is called Raman spectroscopy, and what causes this change in wavelengths is the question. But before going to it, let us picture it as shown here. And this is how the spectrum looks like. We have high intensity Stokes line and low intensity anti-Stokes lines, and then we have molecules excited because of the laser. So to reiterate the same thing, we have a laser line in itself here. We have energy shifted in the higher and lower sides of the elastic scattering. When the wavelength of light scattered is more than, that of the incident light, we call it Stokes-Raman scattering, and when the wavelength of light is lesser than the incident wavelength, we call it anti-Stokes-Raman scattering, and then we all know that there is Raman's elastic scattering. To know that what is represented in x-axis and what is it in y-axis, and why Stokes lines have higher intensity. Okay, x-axis is either the frequency or the wavelength, and since we are talking about shifts in wavelength, it is best described in terms of wave numbers. So what is a wave number? A wave number is inversely proportional to wavelength and has the unit centimeter inverse. Y-axis describes the intensity of the scattered photons. Most important point to be noted here is that Raman process is a weak process, and hence signal to noise ratio is often very poor. In order to see the shift in wavelengths and observe a Raman signal from different materials, there are plethora of important details we must take care of. This technique, because it has the ability to identify and label chemical information, is called a fingerprinting technique. So what does it identify and how does it help identify? So it helps identify the vibration modes present in molecules, so thereby actually identifying the materials. These molecules we know vibrate at a particular wave frequency or wavelength as mentioned here in this slide. We have different vibrations capturing different elements, different molecules. So when a laser is allowed to interact with these molecules vibrating at a particular frequency, the light also gets scattered at these frequencies. Say if you have a mixture of glucose and fructose, the presence of their functional groups in the spectrum can be established if we use a Raman spectrometer. In this way, we will be able to identify the molecules. This will help us characterize whole range of materials. So, but can we perform Raman spectroscopy on every material? The answer to that question is probably a no. So, Raman spectroscopy, other than identifying the material, also helps us characterize the material, by which what I mean is that Raman spectroscopy helps us understand materials like crystal structure, arrangement of atoms, atomic bond energies. All of this can be figured out. Local temperature, how much polarizable the material. Of course, polarizability is the only thing that makes us use Raman spectrum to probe these materials. In fact, we also can find local temperature difference. We can distinguish between different layers of materials and layered materials. In fact, it's one of my studies to identify number of layers and their arrangement in 2D layered materials. We at Bar-Ilan also work on what is called a low frequency Raman. Low frequency Raman is highlighted in the figure. It's shown in the figure in the very close to elastic frequencies here at the very low frequencies. Typically, Raman is measured between 200 to 4000 centimeter inverse, but the low frequency Raman probes very low energy vibrational and rotational modes of molecular structures from probably less than 10 centimeter inverse to 200 centimeter inverse. And in order to do this, we need different optic, we need different filters and different optics. So far, we've been comparing Raman scattering relative to other processes. If you look at different transitions, Raman scattering is very different compared to fluorescence. Say for instance, fluorescence involves an absorption of incident radiation to a higher energy state, and in that state, it gradually decays, giving back some photon of particular energy. Whereas Raman does not involve transition of light to an excited level. All of these happens in ground vibrational levels to excited vibrational levels, or virtual levels to again back to vibrational levels. So Raman effect is observed when incident energy is still less than the energy difference between the vibrational and the excited levels. That brings us to the classical approach to understand Raman. The key idea there is induced dipole moment. So let's quickly imagine a picture of an atom with a positively charged nuclei and negatively charged electron cloud. When an incident electromagnetic radiation of a particular frequency impinges on a molecule, there is a perturbation or a separation of this positively charged nuclei and the negatively charged cloud. This is called induced dipole moment. The strength of this induced dipole moment is given as mu here, and mu is directly proportional to the electric field and this proportionality is described by a constant called polarizability. So this explains that this is so unique to molecules, and it's a function of molecular structures and bands, and mu is directly proportional to electric field, though there are some higher orders, we can ignore it for the time being. And E, it's the wavelength of the incident radiation, can be expressed in terms of this expression E0 cos omega t, and omega can be expressed as L because omega of light, frequency of light. So mu can be written like this, but alpha in itself, which is the polarizability, which also involves some kind of a Taylor approximation here, Taylor series approximation. Alpha can be explained as alpha 0 plus dou alpha by dou q into q, where dou alpha, dou q is actually the physical displacement caused by this radiation. So it's a physical displacement of matter caused by this radiation, and that can be explained by another cosine term. So if we plug these cosine terms back into this expression or for induced polarization, polarizability with a cos component, and then we have electric field with another cos component, we end up getting an expression like this. And after this, what it says is, after using the identity, we get an expression of this kind. And what this says is, we have a set of frequencies which are downshifted, which means they are lower than the incident frequency. And then there is a set of frequency which are higher than the incident frequency, upshifted. And then there is the incident frequency. So we see in this expression three important components. One is that corresponding to the incident light, which is the elastically scattered light. And then the one corresponding to frequencies that are lower than the incident frequencies, which is also called Stokes lines or Stokes-Raman lines. And then there are frequencies that are higher than the incident frequencies, which is also called anti-Stokes-Raman lines. So what's the important condition to have Raman? To have Raman spectrum, d alpha or dou alpha by dou q should not go to 0, which means polarizability should not go to 0, which means there should be an induced dipole moment when light interacts with matter. What does that tell about the intensities? No. Does it tell anything about the intensities of Stokes and anti-Stokes line? Probably not. That's why we may have to take a quantum approach. So in quantum mechanical description, vibration energy states are visualized like this, visualized in energy levels. We have initial and final states via a virtual state. So initial state is here, final state is here, and then it's the, initial state is here, virtual state is here, and this is the final state. While talking about transition between energy levels, we will know for atoms and molecules that if, say for instance, if E1 is greater than E2, nu1 is greater than nu2, which means, or in other words, nu2 is less than nu1. In which case we get Stokes lines, and if E1 is less than E2, here also when E1 is less than E2 and nu1 is less than nu2, in which case we will get anti-Stokes lines. So with the quantum mechanical model, intensity depends on the distribution of the initial states, the population in the initial states, and this is described by Boltzmann's distribution. Thus the intensity ratio of anti-Stokes to Stokes is written or given in this expression here. Since population is much larger in the ground state than in the excited state, intensity of Stokes lines is always much greater compared to intensity of anti-Stokes lines. And we've also seen in the previous slides that intensity of Stokes is always larger compared to the intensity of anti-Stokes lines. This probably explains the picture better. So we need to also take a quantum mechanical picture to appreciate these minor details in the Raman spectrum. And then comes low frequency Raman. Having said all of this, we are revisiting low frequency Raman and see for ourselves how important it is. So we said that between -10 to 200 is the low frequency regime. So for instance, this is the setup here. We have probably sample over here, laser is incident on it, getting reflected back and going through different sets of filters and going through spectrometer. And say if we have amino acid or enantiomer pure crystals or different facets of crystals, the low frequency regime is apparently very different for these same material. Just that if the chirality is different, if the polarization is different, we get different spectrum. So for instance here, the low frequency Raman spectra of racemic and enantiomer pure crystals exhibit a significant variation in the low frequency, which was actually attributed to different hydrogen bond networks in the chiral crystal structures. Similarly, people have also observed very similar low frequency modes or availability of these modes as strong functions of the chains of these organic molecules, chain polarity. Thus, low frequency Raman can be used as a method that is complementary to the currently used methods for characterizing crystal chirality because it's simpler, faster, and more sensitive. And also, we don't require huge sample. So what are we sensitive? What are sensitive to these low frequency Raman? What are sensitive? Or in other words, what can be inferred from low frequency Raman? For instance, a particular mode may pop up at very low frequencies, which probably were not hitherto studied. In this slide and the next slide, we can see that low frequency Raman help us understand in-plane vibrations and out-of-plane vibrations, especially in layered materials like this. We can track, understand hydrogen bonds by stacking. The presence of or the absence of particular shifted mode can help us understand whether there is a particular vibration or not, or there is any particular stacking order or not, or there is any tilt in the material or tilt in layered materials or not. So here what we look at are set of it's a representative structure of 2D materials. 2D layered materials are sheets of atoms actually stacked along the x-axis, and they are held by van der Waals forces. You know, they are very weak. So there are what they are called shear modes here, as you can see, and then there are layer breathing modes, which means it happens out of plane in the layer here. These modes become apparent in the low frequency regime, which is one of those most important motivations to perform low frequency Raman on these materials. So where else do we use low frequency Raman? Whenever there is a spectral change, when there is a spectral change, and spectral change can happen if there is a lighter atom and if there is a shorter bond, and if they are more restricted, like the bond between is represented by force constant, spring constant, and stiffness, reduced mass here. So if anything that perturbs or causes a change to this are sensitive to low frequency spectral regime. Having learned so much about Raman, now let's think of what do we need to make a Raman spectrometer. We need to have source, laser, and then there are multiple filters that are available in the market, and there are more research going on in terms of what kind of filters need to be used. And then there is a spectrometer grating, and then there is a detector. So we need to have an excitation source. We need to have proper geometry, sample illumination geometry with alignment of mirrors and lenses. And then we need to have a light collection geometry. Like we need to know what kind of numerical apertures to use, what kind of lenses to be used. And then we need to have filters, bandpass, what to obstruct, what to allow. And then we need to have a good photosensitive detector. We have already seen before that Raman signal is a weak signal. So how to improve signal to noise ratio in a Raman measurement? Of probably 1 million photons, 1 photon is Raman scattered. So there are different ways to improve this signal, and a lot of research is still underway. Long durations for mapping is one, and in fact mapping itself is one of a great sampling technique in a given region to image, and it's far superior and powerful because it contains a large volume of chemical information in the image. And then further coming back to improving signal, researchers have used different techniques such as using different substrates like metal coated substrates, and different probing tools like using a tip to enhance the field, and bringing more strategies, localization strategies. Researchers are still exploring different other ways to increase or improve the signal to noise ratio. One of this is even working on the optics, the optics change. This domain is particularly exciting and open for exploring. We have, as we say, there are wealth of techniques available. So having said that, we are now here to see what Raman spectra can identify. Here in this slide, Raman spectra is used to diagnose glucose and differentiate it from galactose and fructose present in the skin. So what you see here is a very small fiber-like spectrometer, Raman spectrometer. You need very small mobile spectrometer, and the probe should be user-friendly. This means we are talking about new age instrumentation to make it universal and available to all. So what it does is, here it can simply distinguish between different molecules, so glucose versus galactose versus fructose. There are fine features that are very different and unique to each of these groups. And similarly, Raman spectra is very important in petrochemical industry. Here is an example of how this can be used to differentiate between oils and gases. The presence or presence of identify or locate new minerals. And when we have mixed gases, Raman spectro is very selective, and it can differentiate or discriminate between gases, and thus helping us identify. Not only does it help identify, especially shale oil, which is an alternative oil resource today, materials present in that can also be identified. What it does is it offers a quick and fast analysis compared to any other kind of analysis, and it's non-invasive, which means it doesn't degrade the material. So it's that powerful and important, and it's being used in petrochemical industry. On a similar note, Raman spectra can also be used effectively to distinguish between different tire components. Tire basically is a component of polymers, fillers, and other additives, and it is very important to understand the role and presence of these different components in a tire, and for which Raman immediately comes into rescue. This is actually an AFM image. This describes the morphology of tires, or say, for instance, there are two different polymers here and lot many fillers are here, and this is how a morphology of a tire cross section from one component looks like. And this picture tells of a need to perform a very local chemical measurement to know what material is present at a very local scale. And that brings us to understand how crucial this chemical identification can be to assess various properties of tires. So a very local Raman probing is mandatory, if not just important, in industries like this. So, as I promised you before, now I'm talking about the scopes of Raman research. As we speak, there are multiple advances happening in Raman spectroscopy, one of which is miniaturization. Since Raman is capable of identifying biological molecules very precisely, it's being thought of as a diagnostic tool, and hence it needs to be mobile and friendly to use. There are lots of efforts to miniaturize Raman with advancements in fabrication of miniaturized optical components. Here is this very recently published paper which came out in Review of Scientific Instruments. This demonstrates a cell phone camera Raman spectrometer. What is shown at the top here is commercially available handheld Raman spectrometers. So if some of you are into learning newer topics or fabrication techniques, you have more scope to revolutionize this measurement. The next thing is we've already seen is the importance of identifying molecules at a pixel by pixel level or at the nanoscale. While there are demonstrations available, it is still a challenge to get the chemical sensitivity of materials at the the nanoscale. Researchers have so far have used surface enhanced Raman spectroscopic or Raman scattering techniques like the one that's used here, or they have also employed tips to localize field effect or to enhance field. For industries that need to identify molecules at a very local nanoscale level, there is a scope for a new physics here, new strategy, and a new engineering. Similarly, Raman image and image processing is a big area of research in itself, because interpreting images after mapping requires a lot of processing and a lot of understanding. It is usually done with software packages. This is in its nascent stage and it will gather momentum very soon. This slide tells us about graphene maps done at different temperatures. What we see here is we can see evolution of graphene, evolution of phases with temperature, which they ascribe to the presence of graphene. Say at very high temperatures, we see these bands evolving, which is what is shown here also. And understanding these maps are not really straightforward. Finally, there's a huge scope in Raman data analysis, especially in the areas of machine learning and deep learning, especially in the area of artificial intelligence, where computers are trained to analyze similar features present in Raman spectra of bacteria and viruses. These are set of Raman spectra for viruses and bacteria. Because they are very similar, normal fingerprinting won't work, and this involves tons of data and it is very laborious to work on these data sets. There is a high demand for the material physicists and other researchers who are interested in artificial intelligence. So you can see there are plenty of research going on and it is very new. So finally, I hope I had given an outline of light matter interactions, a brief analysis of Raman theory, Raman effect, its theory, its instrumentation a little bit, I hope, and then scopes in terms of present day research. I hope it is useful, and I thank the audience for their patience. I thank the organizers for hosting me. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'll take them now.
Thank you, ma'am, for your talk, which make us to think overseas and our imagination. Thank you, ma'am. Let's go to the question and answer session. Dear participants, you can ask your question by unmuting your mic, or you can drop the chat box, or resource person will answer your questions.
Hello, madam.
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Madam, அதில் நீங்கள் அந்த குவாண்டம் ராமன் எஃபெக்ட்னு சொன்னீங்களா, அதில் வேவ் ஃபங்க்ஷன் வந்து எப்படி வரும் மேடம்? எப்படி டிட்டர்மைன் பண்ணுவீங்க சிஸ்டத்துடைய வேவ் ஃபங்க்ஷன்?
What?
How can you find the wave function of a quantum Raman effect?
Okay. Usually these are done for diatomic molecules. So a wave function that would correspond with an atomic molecule would work. But I'm not an expert in this. I also don't know much about it. It was largely, so you can understand this as a.
Morgan, we can hear you. Can you repeat your question?
Hello.
We can hear you. Can you post your question in the chat box?
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I can see a few questions here. I can probably take up what could be a good sample for Raman spectroscopy with a shift of 1200 to 1600. If I understand this question right, you want to characterize something else for which you need a material to respond between 1200 to 1600. If that is the question, if that is right, I understand. So carbon is a good material to probe this regime. Diamond is a good material to probe this in this regime, and some few other organic molecules can also give, they have fingerprinting, they have characteristic data in this regime. In elastic scattering, it is understood there is no exchange of energy. That's right. Which means we do not see, it's just scattering with the same amount of energy. Yes, that's right. Any insight on micro Raman for fingerprint reliability? I do not understand that question, actually. If I understand it right, why is it a problem? There can be reliability issues because of high power degradation or something, or because of laser degradation, or what else can be reasons why it should not be reliable? Because as far as micro Raman is concerned, and if the material is Raman active, we should be, if we have good detector system with nice, with good filters and say high resolution grating spectrometer, it shouldn't be a problem to fingerprint any sample. Or is there any particular sample that you have in mind? Okay, about the Raman Hamiltonian, I think that I cannot write it here, but what I understand is we do see this as we take this as a, I mean, it is taken for diatomic molecules, a Hamiltonian that would describe probably rigid rotator would probably work. I do not completely understand that. Okay, what's the optimum method for storing tissue samples for micro Raman spectroscopy? I actually, I'm no expert in this, but we have dealt with viruses samples, and we try to just store them in a refrigerator, but of course with certain treatment. I cannot disclose that, but if there is a particular treatment that the tissues can go through, you can, but usually otherwise it's stored in particular temperature. I mean, probably low temperature would work, as low as refrigeration would work. I do not understand this question, plasma enhanced Raman limitations. I have to get to it. I do not know that. Okay, somebody has asked me about reduced graphene oxide and iron manganese samples, but yeah, they are not saying D or G band. Probably it's to do with the sample preparation in itself, or it's because I mean, what's the power of the laser used, and what's the grating spectrometer grating that you're using? These things matter, and usually Raman signal is very weak, so you can try going for gold coated substrates, which have you can have plasmonic resonances, surface plasmon resonances, enhancing the field. But we tried looking at single layered graphene and bilayered graphenes. It was very difficult for us to get a good Raman spectrum from any of this. So we had to resort to some other techniques, even for a few layered materials. When we were looking at normal silicon dioxide substrate wasn't helping. So there is a whole bunch of literature available on tweaking the substrate, using a good substrate for getting best Raman. So there can be, you can also work with different substrates too. So for instance, interference enhanced substrate, metal reflector, and then an oxide layer. They are called usually Salisbury coatings. You can try them.
Okay, thank you, madam. I think the question is over. Thank you for giving us the wonderful lecture.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No duty is more urgent than giving thanks. I call upon Mr. B. Rajaguru of 3rd BSc Physics to deliver the vote of thanks.
An investment in knowledge, pay the best interest. Good afternoon to all. I am here to present the vote of thanks for today's webinar session. No duty is more urgent than returning thanks. I would like to thank our beloved principal, Reverend Father Dr. S. Maridas S.J. for his words of wisdom that radiated a source of energy within us. Thank you, Father. Next, my heartfelt thanks to the conveners of this webinar, Dr. D. Premanand, Dr. L. Arun Jose, for their valuable work to make this webinar success. Next, I would like to thank our organizer of this webinar, Dr. S.G. Rejit, Dr. M. Augustine, for spending their time to this webinar success. Next, I would like to thank our webinar speaker, Dr. R. Bharati, MSc PhD, Postdoctoral Fellow, Bar-Ilan University, Ramat Gan, Israel, for visiting and enlightening us with their knowledge and spending her valuable time to grace this webinar and making us to know more about light matter interaction and characterization techniques that have deep insight into the topic and also revealed some interesting facts. The point where Dr. R. Bharati ma'am told us about Raman spectroscopy was really informative. I am pretty sure that she have us will definitely help us in our future. Thank you for your wonderful session, ma'am. Next, I thank all our staff members and faculty members who worked hard to make this webinar success.
Thank you.